is honored to host the first Folio's only stop in Nevada as it travels around the country to celebrate 400 years of Shakespeare and his legacy. We hope you've had a chance to see one of the 235 verified copies of this book as part of the exhibit over in Special Collections. If you have not, the exhibit will be going on after the talk today, and we hope you'll have a chance to stop by. As many of you probably know, the first folio includes 36 Shakespeare plays, 18 of which had never been printed before. Without Shakespeare's fellow actors putting together the first folio 7 years after his death, plays like Macbeth, Twelfth Night, The Tempest, or As You Like It might have been lost forever. Many people have made this touring exhibition possible, including the Folger Shakespeare Library, the American Library Association, the Cincinnati Museum, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Google, and other generous sponsors. We would also like to acknowledge campus facilities for creating the perfect climate for the folio, and all the scholars, actors, and musicians making 15 events possible like this one today. Please check our brochure and website to learn more about the activities we have in store, from scholarly lectures to performances. Our website is the most updated place to get information about our events. We have added a musical performance on September 25th in the afternoon. You can find the details and RSVP for that event on the website. So today I'm delighted to introduce Professor Evelyn Gajowski and thank her for speaking today. Professor Gajowski has published 4 books on Shakespeare: The Merry Wives of Windsor New Critical Essays, Presentism, Gender, and Sexuality in Shakespeare, Revisions of Shakespeare, Essays in Honor of Robert Ornstein, and The Art of Loving, Female Subjectivity and Male Discursive Traditions in Shakespeare's Tragedies. She also serves as the series editor of the Arden Shakespeare and Theory series, which places the plays in the context of contemporary critical theories. As the Shakespearean in UNLV's Department of English, she teaches graduate seminars and upper division undergraduate courses in Shakespeare, early modern English drama, gender, and early modern literature, gender theory, and literary theory. Professor Gajowski has delivered plenary and keynote addresses and guest lectures at many prestigious venues around the world, including the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, and will soon be giving a series of talks in Taiwan. We're fortunate to have her addressing us today. Thanks.
Thank you, Priscilla. Can you hear me, John? Okay. So first I want to let you know if 21st century Shakespeare means to you manga, Shakespeare, or graphic novels, Shakespeare and graphic novels, I'm not dealing with that. I'm dealing with developments within academia proper and their relations to our culture, our contemporary culture. 25 years ago, I had accepted the invitation to join the faculty of UNLV, and my spouse and I had moved into our brand new home in Las Vegas. The house was located, at least temporarily, at the liminal space where development ends and the Mojave Desert begins. One morning, my spouse backed his car out of the garage to go to work. A sudden movement caught my eye. On the concrete garage floor where the car had just been parked, to my horror, I saw a lizard. It was perfectly sliced in half, each half wriggling in quiet desperation as if trying to reunite with the other half. I felt helpless about trying to alleviate its suffering and pain. It must have been hiding in the underside of the car. We humans had, however unaware, inflicted violence and death on the creature. Flash forward several months. I don't intend to continually gross you out, but my spouse went to pick up what he thought was a piece of dirt or dust on the carpet in the middle of the master bedroom. But it wasn't a piece of dirt or dust at all. It was a tiny scorpion, and it bit him. We went to the ER with the scorpion in tow in a baby food jar. The ER/MD identified the scorpion as not a tree bark scorpion, the only one of 17 species that resides in the desert southwest of the US, and that's dangerous to humans. We left the jar kind of carelessly on the back seat of the car for a day or so. By the time we thought of it, again, the scorpion was dead. Another instance of human carelessness that caused the death of a non-human creature. Flash forward several years, a daddy long-legged long-legged spider was captured in the prison of our bathtub. Again and again, it tried to crawl up the side, only to slide back down. This one has a happier ending. I watched it for a short while, a tiny little Sisyphus repeating its endless task over and over and over. Finally, I reached in as gently as I could with a tissue in hand and removed it from the certain death of the bathtub prison and placed it on the bathroom floor. Again, to my horror, I noticed that a couple of its delicate legs had broken in the process. It slowly limped away, but at least it was alive. No matter how gently I had tried to handle it, I had unintentionally caused it harm. Others in this room may have experienced something similar, watching wildlife live with the unintended effects of our intervention in its life. These instances are most likely to occur perhaps when your house has just been built on what was once native Mojave Desert habitat. As time passed, our subdivision grew up around our house, and we spotted fewer and fewer lizards sunning themselves on the cinder block walls that line our yard, and no other scorpions. Well, all of this is well and good. However, you may wonder, what in the world does this have to do with Shakespeare? These anecdotes point up the permeability of the demarcations, boundaries, and walls that humans have constructed for millennia to separate the non-human world outside of us, the natural, wild spaces on the one hand, and the human world, the domesticized, civilized spaces on the other. These anecdotes also point up the futility of those walls, whether they're walls around trying to separate our gardens from wildlife, or whether they're the walls of our house, or whether they're our clothes and our skin, which I guess is the final boundary between us and the non-human world. No matter how hard we try, nature just keeps pouring in, or boring in, or invading at times even our final line of demarcation, our clothes and our skin. These walls that humans build are an illusion. We can never keep the creatures out, the lizards, the scorpions, the spiders. That's one of the main points that Rebecca LaRoche and Jennifer Monroe make in their book, Shakespeare and Ecofeminist Theory, that's forthcoming in the Arden Shakespeare and Theory series in February 2017. Ecofeminism and its theoretical cousin, eco-criticism, of course, have their origins in our real world, environmental, political, and social developments of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Developments inside academia, they have their roots outside academia, the climate change crisis. When we think of nature in connection to Shakespeare, one dramatic text that comes to mind is King Lear, particularly those scenes where he's homeless on the heath in the midst of a storm. I'd like to draw your attention to my first film clip from a 2008 TV movie starring Ian McKellen as Lear and directed by Trevor Nunn. At the outset of the tragedy, Lear has held a love auction to divide his kingdom among his three daughters, Goneril, Regan, and Cordelia. Goneril and Regan dutifully deliver unctuous, flattering speeches to win their respective thirds of the kingdom. However, when it's Cordelia's turn, she finds that she cannot, quote, heave my heart into my mouth, as she puts it. She's incapable of speech and says nothing. Nothing will come of nothing, Lear says. He is hurt and angry and banishes her from his kingdom. He thereby places himself in the hands of the two daughters who do not love him, and they, respectively, turn him out of their households. So in Act 3, Scene 4, we find Lear on the heath. Ariel and Lana, thank you.
In the grave, those who have answered with thy uncovered body this extremity of the skies. Is man no more than this? Consider him well. Thou hast the worm, no silk, the beast, no hide, the sheep, no wool, the cat, no perfume. There's three of us are sophisticated. Thou art the thing itself. Unaccommodated man is no more but such a poor, bare, forked animal.
Thank you. Is man no more than this? Thou art the thing itself. Unaccommodated man is no more but such a poor, bare, forked animal as thou art. Off, off, you lendings, come, unbutton here. Again, that's Act 4. Act 3, Scene 4. And I apologize for the quality of the audio on that. We grabbed that off of a DVD, and I think the audio on the other film clips is going to be a higher quality. It is a moment of moral awakening on Lear's part as he recognizes his commonality with the fellow homeless beggar, Tom O'Bedlam, who of course is another character, really, in disguise, Edgar. He tries to simulate Tom O'Bedlam's state of near nakedness. And I would underscore that it is not coincidental that Lear's moral awakening occurs in a natural setting, under the influence, in part, of the raging storm. I encourage folks to attend Professor Charles Whitney's talk here, same time, same place, 4 p.m. next Wednesday, the 21st of September, particularly if you'd like to hear more about Shakespeare and the environment. Like ecofeminism and eco-criticism, post-colonial, race, and ethnicity studies have their origins in our world, in environmental, political, and social developments of the late 20th century and the early 21st centuries. These developments, inside academia, have their roots outside academia once again, in the end of the British Empire, the U.S. Civil Rights Movement, and more recently the U.S. Black Lives Matter movement. These strategies are concerned to analyze colonized peoples, peoples of color, and peoples of minority status in a given society as subjects rather than objects. I was surprised to learn that when I examined the theater history of the various representations of characters such as Shylock in Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, he was represented on stage as a tragic figure in the 19th century. The play is, of course, categorized generically as a romantic comedy, although there is much in its subject matter, of course, that challenges the boundaries of that genre. The early 20th century, approximately a century ago, saw a reaction against this sympathetic portrayal of Shylock as too sentimental. That's the language they used 100 years ago. Representations of Shylock on stage, therefore, shifted instead toward the invocation of anti-Semitic stereotypes, the hooked nose, the red hair, etc., especially in the 1920s and the 1930s, and not just in fascist Italy or Nazi Germany, but here in the US. In a post-Holocaust world, however, the invocation of such stereotypes is unthinkable. This is just one example of the many ways in which political and social events in different eras have shaped our interpretations of Shakespeare's plays, whether we're actors and directors putting up a production, or audience members consuming that production in the theater, or readers sitting in the solitude of our studies at home consuming the printed page. As opposed to Christopher Marlowe's The Jew of Malta, which invokes anti-Semitic stereotypes in its construction of the character Barabbas, Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice provides Shylock with at least one moment of subjectivity. His famous "Hath not a Jew eye" speech in Act 3, Scene 1 is remarkable in this regard. My second film clip stars Al Pacino as Shylock in a cinematic text from 2004 directed by Michael Radford. It's about 2 minutes long, a little bit less. Ariel and Lana.
I'm sure if you forfeit, you will not take his flesh. What's that good for?
To bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies, and what's his reason? I am a Jew. Hath not a Jew eyes? Hath not a Jew hands? Organs? Dimensions? Senses? Affections? Passions? Fed with the same food? Hurt with the same weapons? Subject to the same diseases? Healed by the same means? Warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is? If you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge? If we are like you in the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge? If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferance be? By Christian example. Why revenge? The villainy you teach me, I will execute, and it shall go hard, but I will better the instruction.
Antonio is at his house. We should speak with him.
One of the most notable aspects of Pacino's Shylock is the anger that comes through. There are many, many different ways to deliver this speech, of course. That's what impressed me the most about his delivery, perhaps. Shylock's central argument is, of course, that Jews are humans, just as Christians are. They are subjects, not objects. He thereby challenges the objectification of Jews on the part of the Christian characters in the play. And in this particular film, we have a lot of additional kind of editorial commentary by the director, Michael Radford. We actually have Antonio, Jeremy Irons' Antonio, spitting on Shylock at the beginning, and other such examples of anti-Semitic behavior. That's something that's only referred to in the dialogue as having occurred in the past. But Michael Radford chooses to put that on the screen. Shakespeare has Shylock say these lines in an early modern England and within the world of the play that was, and are, we like to believe, more anti-Semitic than our own. And in the end, Shylock says that he will take revenge. We begin to understand what motivates him to try to cut a pound of flesh from Antonio, the merchant of Venice. Theater conventions and practices like theoretical and critical developments are in a constantly evolving state. In one of Shakespeare's several plays that dramatize the problem of the true woman falsely accused, Othello is led by the villain Iago to believe that his wife, Desdemona, is guilty of adultery. Despite Desdemona's innocence, Othello murders her. Today, audiences expect to see a black actor play Othello rather than a Laurence Olivier in black shoe polish or an Anthony Hopkins in makeup of a tawnier shade of decades past. A Royal Shakespeare Company theater production of Othello, directed by Iqbal Khan last summer, summer of 2015, is unique among the many theater and cinematic productions I've experienced over the years, in that it features a black Iago as well as a black Othello. The production stars Hugh Corsi as Othello and Lucian Massamati as Iago. This film clip is from Act 3, Scene 3, the central deception scene. It takes about 8 minutes acting time on the stage. Between the beginning of that scene and the end of that scene, Iago uses all kinds of strategies, reverse psychology, insinuation, and so on, to turn Othello against Desdemona. He pours the poisonous lie of Desdemona's adultery into Othello's ear. So this is Hugh Corsi as Othello and Lucian Massamati as Iago, and this is about 2 minutes and 45 seconds, this film clip. It's a long scene, it's several hundred lines long. This clip is from just before Othello's monologue, where he says, "Haply, for I am black, and I have not the soft parts of conversation that chamberers have, and I am along in the vale of years." So this is right there in the middle of that scene. So Lana and Ariel.
But I do see you are moved. I am to pray you not to strain my speech to grosser issues, nor to larger reach than to suspicion.
I will not.
Should you do so, my lord, my speech should fall into such vile success which my thoughts aimed not. Cassio's my worthy friend. But I do see you are moved.
No, not much moved. I do not think but Desdemona's honest.
Well, long live she so, and long live you to think so.
And yet, how nature, erring from itself...
Right, but that's the point. To be bold with you, not to affect many proposed matches of her own clime, complexion, and degree, whereto we see in all things nature tends, one may smell in such a will most rank, foul disproportions, thoughts unnatural. But pardon me, I do not in position distinctly speak of her, though I may fear her will, recoiling to her better judgment, may fail to match you with her country forms and happily repent.
Farewell.
Farewell!
If more thou dost perceive, let me know more. Set on thy wife to observe. Leave me, Iago.
My lord, I might entreat your honor to scan this thing no farther. Leave it to time. Though 'tis fit that Cassio have his place, for sure. He fills it up with great ability. Yet, if you please to put him off a while, you shall by that perceive him and his means. Note if your lady strain his entertainment with any strong or vehement importunity. Much will be seen in that. In the meantime, let me be thought too busy in my fears, as worthy cause I have to fear I am, and hold her free, I do beseech your honor.
Fear not my government.
After this clip leaves off, Iago exits, and Othello has a monologue in which he rehearses the various reasons that Desdemona has to be unfaithful. And as I mentioned, they include his age, his race, and his status as a soldier rather than as a courtier. I wanted to include the monologue here, but I wasn't able to do so. So I'll just read it for you. So Iago exits, and this is around, if you're interested in these textual matters, this is around line 275 of 3:3, this very long central scene of deception. Othello says about Iago, "This fellow's of exceeding honesty, and knows all qualities with a learned spirit of human dealings. If I do prove her haggard, though her jesses were my dear heartstrings, I'd whistle her off and let her down the wind to prey at fortune. Haply, for I am black, and have not those soft parts of conversation that chamberers have, for I am declined into the vale of years. Yet that's not much." He's jerking back and forth in terms of believing Iago and believing Desdemona in this speech, just as he is throughout the entire scene. "She's gone. I am abused, and my relief must be to loathe her. O curse of marriage that we can call these delicate creatures ours and not their appetites. I had rather be a toad and live upon the vapor of a dungeon than keep a corner in the thing I love for others' uses. Yet 'tis the plague of great ones, prerogatived are they less than the base. 'Tis destiny unshunnable like death, even when this forked plague is fated to us, when we do quicken. Look where she comes." So Iago's not there, Desdemona enters, and he believes in her for a few moments until she exits and Iago re-enters. And by the forked plague, of course, as you know from your English courses, your medieval and early modern literature courses or your Shakespeare courses, you're referring to the horns of the cuckold, the symbolic or metaphorical symbol of humiliation for the male who is not man enough to satisfy his wife, right? What is notable about this production is that Hugh Corsi refused to play the role of Othello unless he played it to a black Iago. Like other actors of color, Corsi could not stand the prospect of playing a black male protagonist who was successfully manipulated for 5 acts by a white male villain. This is an example of how changing demographics within the contemporary theater world, as well as within the contemporary academic world, play a part in constructing new meanings in Shakespeare's texts. While delivering a paper at the World Shakespeare Congress in both Stratford-upon-Avon and London last month, I was fortunate enough to experience several productions of the Royal Shakespeare Company and the Globe. Both theaters are doing interesting things with race. The RSC production of Hamlet featured Papa Essiedu in a nearly all-black cast that was set in sub-Saharan Africa. The Globe production of Macbeth featured a black actor, Ray Fearon, as Macbeth. In one of its plenary sessions, the World Shakespeare Company also, World Shakespeare Congress also featured a wonderful interview with Adrian Lester, who spoke eloquently of his experiences as a black actor negotiating Shakespeare's roles and Shakespeare's texts. The next film clip is one of two this afternoon that is not from a theater or a cinematic production per se. It's from the Guardian's Shakespeare Solos project, undertaken like our own Shakespeare First Folio a special exhibit and so many other performative and academic and popular culture events around the globe this year to commemorate the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. It features Adrian Lester as Hamlet in Act 3, Scene 1, the to be or not to be soliloquy, maybe the most famous words in all of English literature or the English language itself. By the way, Adrian Lester had played Hamlet years earlier in a 2002 TV movie directed by Peter Brook, but this is a much more recent film clip just in the last year or so. So this is Act 3, Scene 1, To Be or Not to Be, Adrian Lester as Hamlet, and it's about 3 minutes long.
To be or not to be? That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them. To die. To sleep no more. And by asleep, to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished. To die. To sleep. To sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have than fly to others that we know not of. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all, and thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought, and enterprises of great pitch and moment, with this regard, their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action.
These are the
Nobody returns from that undiscovered country except for his own father, of course, right? I think this is one of the great moments in Western literature, one of the great moments in Shakespeare, because of the degree to which we, the audience, we, the reader, enter into Shakespeare, into Hamlet's consciousness through the device of the soliloquy. And I like to teach it side by side with Titus Andronicus because by comparison, it shows the characters in Titus Andronicus is almost kind of like wind-up dolls or that rabbit on that battery commercial, right? They just kind of almost mechanically and unthinkingly are taking revenge. Here, less than 10 years, way less than 10 years after Shakespeare's first tragedy, Titus, in the early 1590s, he's coming back to this theme, this problematic of revenge once again, and totally turning it upside down and inside out and on its head in having Hamlet deliberate about whether to go kill another person, right? And it's exactly, I think that's part of what makes this tragedy so great, this soliloquy so great, and yet it's what 19th century criticism condemns Hamlet for. Shame on Hamlet, he delays, he deliberates too much, he's too intellectual, he's got to be more of a man of action like Othello or something, you know. I think that criticism, which is a couple centuries old, but still circulates, you know, in Cliff's Notes and in high school classrooms, unfortunately, is, you know, totally misses the point of one of the things that's so great about Hamlet, that this is a savage burden of revenge that has been cast upon him by his father. Can you hear me? John, can you still hear me? My voice is going in and out. Okay. At any rate, okay. Like ecofeminism, eco-criticism, and post-colonial race, ethnicity studies, queer theory has its origins in environmental, political, and social developments of the late 20th and early 21st centuries as well. These developments within academia, more specifically, have their roots outside academia, this time in the specifically in the Stonewall riots in Greenwich Village in 1969. That's when gays who were frequenting a particular bar in Greenwich Village objected to their being kind of rounded up and just routinely carried off to jail. They protested against that in 1969, all those years ago. So queer theory within academia is related to these developments in our society a few decades ago. Stonewall in 1969, the gay liberation movement, the AIDS epidemic of the 1980s, and so on. These strategies are concerned to analyze GLBTQ peoples in a given society, again, as subjects rather than objects. Shakespeare's cross-dressing plays with boy actors, at least in Shakespeare's time, costumed as female protagonists who then put on male disguises, provide the greatest possibilities for gender bending and resulting homoerotic meanings to emerge. In As You Like It, a boy actor cross-dresses as a female protagonist, Rosalind, who then cross-dresses as Ganymede, who then cross-dresses as Rosalind in a couple of scenes in The Forest of Arden, in which Rosalind/Ganymede tutors Orlando in love. So of all the cross-dressing plays, I think there's 70 or so created and performed in the early modern period, of which Shakespeare wrote 5. Two Gentlemen, Merchant, As You Like It, Twelfth Night, and Cymbeline. And it's As You Like It and Twelfth Night where Shakespeare's playing around with heteroeroticism and getting a lot of mileage out of it in terms of humor. In Twelfth Night, but the Ganymede, the Rosalind Ganymede figure, to complete my thought, is the only figure where we have 4 levels of this kind of gender, playing around with gender roles, or this layering of genders. In Twelfth Night, a boy actor cross-dresses as one of two male protagonists, as one of the 2 female protagonists, Viola, who then cross-dresses as Cesario. Like most of Shakespeare's romantic comedies, the dramatic action of both As You Like It and Twelfth Night concludes with heterosexual marriages. Sometimes not 1, but 2, 3, or 4 of them. The more the better. Marriage for Shakespeare, in this genre at least, symbolizes social harmony. But this occurs only after rehearsing various other possibilities throughout most of the dramatic action. In both plays, the central cross-dressed figure attracts the attention and the sexual desire of both female and male characters. Shakespeare pulls out all the stops in playing around with the homoerotic possibilities, the cross-dressed figure supplying a specific example of that comic device, mistaken identity, that Shakespeare deploys so often throughout all of the romantic comedies. A moment of Twelfth Night, Act 2, Scene 4, from the 1996 cinematic text directed by Trevor Nunn, is a case in point. Ben Kingsley plays Feste, and that's character that you'll see as soon as the clip comes up, and he's singing the song Come Away, Death, while Viola / Cesario, played by Imogen Stubbs, and Orsino, played by Toby Stevens, edge closer and closer to each other. The film clip I have cuts out rather abruptly, unfortunately, but not before a near kiss on the part of the two male characters. So if we could see that, this is about just a little less than 2 minutes.
Come away, death, and in sad cypress let me be laid. Fly away, breath, fly away, breath. I am slain by a fair, cruel maid. Not a friend, greet my poor corpse, where my bones shall be thrown. 1,000 sighs to save, lay me over sad. True lover never find my grave to weep
My students are so cynical, they think there's nothing so radical about this, that she really looks too much like a female for there to be any male homoerotic attraction there. But it's the kind of directorial choice that wouldn't have been made before the past couple decades, before the advent of queer theory and GLBT criticism in academia. Twelfth Night is loaded with many such homoerotic moments, including those when the other female protagonist, Olivia, is attracted to the Viola / Cesario figure, as well from the moment she first sets eyes on him, her, it in Act 1, Scene 5. Like ecofeminism, eco-criticism, post-colonial race, ethnicity studies, and queer theory, feminist theory has its origins in the environmental, political, and social developments of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Feminist theory and criticism within academia, more specifically, have their roots outside academia in the women's liberation movement of the 1960s and 70s. These strategies are concerned to analyze females as subjects rather than objects. It is difficult in a post-women's liberation movement world, for example, to represent Katharina in Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew as merely the butt of a male joke, as a female who is initially subjected to taming by her wooer, and then a wife who is subjected to taming by her husband. Shakespeare does this radical thing in his romantic comedies. The female protagonist takes center stage. The autonomy, intelligence, resilience, wit, and power of the female protagonists in Shakespeare's romantic comedies are especially celebrated. In fact, the romantic comedies such as You Like It, Rosalind's sexual desire for Orlando drives the plot. I'd like to draw your attention to one of my favorite Shakespeare scenes, Act 4, Scene 1 of Much Ado About Nothing, or what I call the aborted wedding scene. When we think of Much Ado, we tend to think of Shakespeare's two most remarkable creations, Beatrice and Benedick. They come to mind. Shakespeare's warring partners in the so-called Battle of the Sexes, and for good reason. As far as heterosexual relationships go, it just doesn't get any better than Beatrice and Benedick in terms of matched intelligence, matched wits, as well as reciprocity and mutuality, at least in the romantic comedies. But there's another couple in Much Ado, Hero and Claudio, and their plot line dramatizes the problem of the true woman falsely accused that I mentioned earlier with regard to Othello, a problem that Shakespeare returns to again and again throughout his career as a dramatist. In Act 4, Scene 1 is the scene in which Claudio publicly repudiates Hero at the wedding altar because he has been led to believe by a villain, Don John, that she has met with another man at her bedchamber window on the very eve of their wedding. Under the pressure of Claudio's accusation, Hero faints. Everyone exits, and Beatrice and Benedick are left alone on stage. The emotional intensity of Claudio's public repudiation of Hero has an impact on these two sparring partners. They finally drop their defense mechanisms and declare their love for each other. "Come, bid me do anything for thee," Benedick offers in conventional Petrarchan style. However, Beatrice responds, "Kill Claudio." After all, thanks to Claudio, Hero is now damaged goods on the marriage market. When Benedick refuses to do so, saying, "Ha, not for the wide world," Beatrice is morally outraged, not only at the injustice that has just been done to her cousin Hero, but also because of Benedick's insincerity, the gap between his declarations of love for her, which she's just heard, on the one hand, and his refusal to defend Hero's honor on the other. Beatrice rails against the bars of the cage of the feminine gender in which she feels contained. "Oh, that I were a man," she says, "I would eat his heart in the marketplace." And so here's a clip. This is the longest clip. It's about 4 minutes long, of Emma Thompson as Beatrice and Kenneth Branagh as Benedick in Act 4, Scene 1 of Much Ado, the cinematic text directed by Kenneth Branagh back in 1993. It begins at the moment where everybody exits and they're alone on stage. And I'd just like to draw your attention to those two angry speeches by Beatrice after the exchange that I just quoted. So, Lana and Ariel.
Lady Beatrice, have you wept all this while?
Yea, and I will weep a while longer.
I will not desire that.
You have no reason. I do it freely.
Surely I do believe your fair cousin is wronged.
How much might the man deserve of me that would right her?
Is there any way to show such friendship?
A very even way, but no such friend.
May a man do it?
It is a man's office, but not yours.
I do love nothing in the world so well as you. Is not that strange?
As strange as the thing I know not. It were as possible for me to say I love nothing so well as you. But believe me not. And yet I lie not. I confess nothing, nor I deny nothing. I am sorry for my cousin.
Oh, my sword, Beatrice, thou lovest me.
Do not swear and eat it.
I will swear by it that you love me, and I will make him eat it that says I love not you.
Why then, God forgive me.
What offense, sweet Beatrice.
You have stayed me in a happy hour. I was about to protest I loved you.
And do it with all thy heart.
I love you with so much of my heart that none is left to protest.
Come, bid me do anything for thee.
Kill Claudio.
For the wide world.
You kill me to deny it. Fare you well.
Carry, sweet Beatrice.
I am gone, though I am here. There is no love in you. Nay, I pray you, let me go.
Beatrice.
In faith, I will go.
We'll be friends first.
Dare easier be friends with me than fight with mine enemy.
Is Claudio thine enemy?
Is it not approved in the height of villain that had slandered, scorned, dishonored my kinswoman? Oh, that I were a man! What? I'll bear her in hand until they come to take hands, and then with public accusation, uncovered slander, mitigated rancor! Oh, God, that I were a man! I would eat his heart in the marketplace!
hear me, Beatrice.
Talk with a man out at a window. A proper saying.
Nay, but Beatrice!
Sweet hero. She is wronged. She is slandered. She is undone.
Beatrice!
He is now as valiant as Hercules that only tells a lie and swears it. I cannot be a man with wishing. Therefore, I will die a woman with grieving.
By this hand I love thee.
Use it for my love some other way than swearing by it.
Think you in your soul the Count Claudio hath wronged Hero?
Yea, as sure as I have a thought or a soul.
Enough. I am engaged. I will challenge him. Go. Comfort your cousin. I must say she is dead. And so, farewell.
In the process of this crucial interaction between Beatrice and Benedict, she pulls him out of the realm of male privilege and into the realm of female vulnerability. By the scene's end, as we just saw, he marches off in quest of a duel with Claudio. And I have to say that we tend to take, or I'll speak for myself, I tended to take the anger in this scene from Beatrice for granted. Until a year ago, when our own Professor Leslie Cross, who's sitting right here, gave a wonderful talk on different representations of Beatrice in theater history. And she pointed out that in, the late 1700s, the late 1800s, that we had many more stereotypically feminine representations of Beatrice, and that throughout, by the time we got to the end of the Victorian age, a century or more later, constructions of Beatrice, representations of Beatrice began to be affected by the ideas of the concepts of the new woman circulating in US society and UK society and European society. So we can't take the kind of raw anger that we get here from Emma Thompson's Beatrice for granted. When you look at the representations such as those that Leslie showed at the beginning of her talk, it's not the Beatrice that we know and love necessarily. In the tragedies, feminist scholars turn critical attention, which had traditionally fastened on male protagonists, to female protagonists. Instead of focusing on Othello and Iago, for example, they shift critical attention to Desdemona, Emilia, Bianca, the female characters in the play who had been all but ignored for centuries, and also institutions of marriage, and specifically patriarchal marriage, and the ways in which male characters treat female characters. In a remarkably poignant scene preceding the murder scene, the two female characters, Emilia and Desdemona, are alone as Emilia helps Desdemona get ready for bed, and the door is shut for a moment against the misogynist ranting and raving that dominates much of the dramatic action from Act 3, Scene 3 onward. Ironically, Emilia and Desdemona are discussing what? Unfaithfulness and adultery. The scene concludes with Emilia's big monologue, an attack on the double standard. This film clip, like Adrian Lester's To Be or Not to Be from Hamlet, is again from The Guardian's Shakespeare Solos project. British actress Eileen Atkins delivers Emilia's monologue. So again, I just want to alert you to the fact that it's not a clip from a dramatic or a theatrical or a cinematic production. Eileen Atkins is sitting in a restaurant, and we can hear sounds of dishware and tableware in the background, but nevertheless, this is Emilia's monologue from the end of the so-called Willow Song scene in Othello. The last clip.
But I do think it is their husbands' faults when wives do fall. Say that they slack their duties and pour out treasures into foreign laps, or else break out in peevish jealousies, throwing restraint upon us, or say they strike us, or scant our former having in despite why we have goals, and though we have some grace, yet have we some revenge. Let husbands know. Their wives have sense like them. They see and smell and have their palates both for sweet and sour as husbands have. What is it that they do when they change us for others? Is it sport? I think it is. And doth affection breed it? I think it does. Is't frailty that errs? I think so too. And have not we affections, desires for sport, and frailty as men have? Then let them use us well, else let them know the ills we do. Their ills instruct us so.
And then she takes a slug of wine, right?
The mask of night is on my face.
Amelia's speech is remarkable in many ways. It resonates with Shylock's "Hath not a Jew eyes" speech, which we viewed just a few moments ago. In both cases, within the dramatic worlds of the play, a minority discourse, whether that of a woman or a Jew, poses a challenge to a dominant discourse, whether that of misogyny or anti-Semitism. Shakespeare loves to do this sort of thing, emphasize the view of a minority subculture as well as the view of a dominant culture in any dramatic world that he creates. Amelia's speech also participates in emergent discourse to the extent that it points ahead decades, even centuries, to social practices and beliefs in Shakespeare's future, our present, in a post-Freudian era after Freud taught us that both sexes of the human animal are sexual creatures. I hope that in the past few minutes I have suggested why Shakespeare resonates so powerfully for us at the outset of the 21st century. All of this is to say that, circling back to 1616, the year of Shakespeare's death 400 years ago, the multiplicity of approaches to interpreting Shakespeare that has developed over the last 4 centuries between his time and our time is due to the first folio, compiled by Hemmings and Condell, Shakespeare's fellow actors, in 1623. So go over there and look at it if you haven't done so yet. Historical scholarship has given us lots of information and facts about Shakespeare's culture and his life. Despite the fact that we can learn many details about Shakespeare's life and times, however, we can never perfectly know these things. Everything about early modern England, or what he ate for breakfast, or what was on his mind. The closest we can come to understanding what was on his mind lies in the texts that he has left us. And they call for interpretation on our part. So we're in a different realm, the realm of hermeneutics, of interpretation, of values, rather than the realm of objective facts. You know, Shakespeare was born in this year, or Shakespeare died in this year, or the folio was published in that year. However, we do know about our time, and I would suggest that it is a thought-provoking exercise to read his words written in his time, preserved fortuitously in the first folio in 1623, for us to read self-consciously from the vantage point of our time. It's all that we're capable of doing, really. Some of us own up to this fact, and some of us do not. And the meanings that we construct in Shakespeare's texts toward the outset of the 21st century, as though we are kind of co-authors with him or alongside him, are all the more compelling for our understanding of this phenomenon. What is at stake in our reading of Shakespeare's texts? Once we come to understand the various ways in which theory resonates with not only Shakespeare's texts, but the so-called real world, the world outside the world of the mind, outside the world of academia, then we come to understand that theory is capable of powerfully enriching not only our reading of Shakespeare's texts, but our lives. Thank you. And thank you to Lana Fagai and Ariel Santos, who took care of all the tech stuff for me in terms of bringing up the film clips. And thank you also, Priscilla, for taking care of the lights it just allowed me to think about what I was saying instead of worrying about all that other stuff.
1 or 2 minutes available for questions if Professor Gajowski is willing to entertain them.
Yes, and I'm sorry I went so long. I had timed it at home as shorter than this.
So then I was really struck by your metaphor of the animals being harmed at the beginning of your talk. And then this idea of all the many interpretations of Shakespeare that have happened over the last 400 years. And wondered if you could potentially talk a little bit about that fear that by doing a feminist interpretation or a genderqueer interpretation or having a black man in a certain role like Hamlet, that we are somehow damaging Shakespeare in the same way that we might damage a spider that we tried to take out of the tub.
I think that kind of concern is premised on the notion of Shakespeare's text as some kind of fixed entity, right? Whereas what I'm suggesting here, I wasn't explicitly arguing for it, but I hope that I was suggesting that over the course of 400 years, we're constantly producing new meanings in the text, whether we're acting them, whether we're reading them. And those meanings are shaped by the values, the beliefs, the mores, the practices of the time and the space in which we live. So I can't emphasize enough the degree to which Shakespeare's texts or any literary texts are elastic, flexible entities into which we are constantly pouring meanings. So I think the premise of that question comes from a different standpoint, maybe a more traditional standpoint, the notion that Shakespeare put all the meanings in them, and we're just, as I sometimes say in class, you know, if you're really, really good, I'll give you the jigsaw puzzle and a few clues as to how to put it together properly. I'm not into teaching literary texts in that way. So I look at readers and theater people as creators of meaning. I think that probably comes through in this talk. I don't know if I answered your question, though.
Is there something special about Shakespeare that allows it to be so flexible? Are we also looking at other works by other playwrights in a similar way, and has it worked as well somehow?
Yeah, I think what I'm saying is true of, I guess I'm suggesting that it's true of all literature, the way that basically the approach that I'm articulating is that of an ism I didn't mention in my paper, presentism. And so it basically believes what I've just said, that we, you know, and that goes back to Oscar Wilde, the notion that critics are artists in creating meaning in literary texts. And it goes all the way through Terry Hawkes, a prominent Shakespearean who just passed away a couple years ago, who basically says the same things, that we need to be responsible for the readings that we're putting into the texts. So I guess I'm going to answer the question both ways. Yes, I think it's true of all texts, generally speaking, but I do think that Shakespeare's texts, because of the quality of the language, because of his love of nature, because of the comprehensiveness of his vision of the human animal, opens up the texts to us today, given our various positions, our various standpoints, whether we're people of color or women or gays or whatever, in a way that doesn't come through perhaps as much in some other text by some other authors. Does that make sense? So it's kind of a both-and answer. I think I spoke to that most directly, perhaps in my paper when I was mentioning the minority view that he loves to give us in opposition to the dominant view, regardless of whether he's dramatizing conflict, dramatic conflict, and of course drama is based on conflict, whether he's dramatizing conflict having to do with race or gender or class or whatever. Anybody else?
So much are stereotypes. Richard II, the hunchback, is bad. And then you have these amazing female characters who are not stereotypical. So the paradox is so rich. So my question is, do you see, where is he innovative for his time? Maybe that's the question. Where do you see that he's going beyond what would be the norms?
Well, I think I answered the second part of your question by referring to Amelia, the fact that she's, in her attack on the double standard and her argument that women are sexual creatures too, you know, she's certainly not advancing the practices and the beliefs of early modern England. She's pointing ahead to centuries later, right? Whereas Iago in that play, I would say, represents a residual discourse, a discourse that's kind of dying off in the Middle Ages, you know, the discourse that all women are whores and that men project sexuality onto the female body and they retain rationality for themselves. But the first part of your question, before you posed it as a question, I guess I'd like to comment on that too, and that is, I think his feat is quite remarkable in the comedies in terms of his creation of female protagonists that take center stage, that are treated not as just things to be fought over by two male characters. They are subjects rather than objects, as I've said again and again. But in the tragedies, it's a different story. I think we do have stereotypical representations, and so that feminist critics, maybe critics generally, but especially feminist critics in the last few decades, have pointed out that Shakespeare is unrealistic in giving us a demonized set of daughters, Goneril and Regan, and an idealized third daughter, Cordelia. Where is the real woman supposed to be in that in that mix? So I think that might come through, especially in the tragedies, more so than in the comedies that that Shakespeare has been criticized by critics for reproducing stereotypes. The virgin whore stereotype, I guess, is a shorthand way of referring to it. Right? So there are some generic distinctions that could be made. And this comes through, I think, when we look at him side by side with other playwrights, and when we look at him side by side with female playwrights. Lady Mary Roth, W-R-O-T-H, is a female playwright I've been looking at, a contemporary of Shakespeare, who gives us, in her pastoral tragic comedy, which is kind of like As You Like It or Midsummer Night's Dream, a bunch of lovers wandering around in the woods, she gives us, in that play, she, by the way, is a member of the Sidney Circle. She's a niece of Sir Philip Sidney and Mary Sidney, so she's a member of the elite and therefore very well educated, and produces in the genre of prose and the genre of poetry and the genre of drama. But she gives us two female characters who are friends with one another, Sylvesta and Musella, and they subordinate their heterosexual relations to that friendship between the two of them. So that makes Shakespeare look, you know, that text is dated around 1620, not that long after Shakespeare died. Love's Victory is the title, and it's something, an edition that I'm working on at the moment. It's like the only non-Shakespearean thing that I'm working on recently, but if you put that side by side with Hermia and Helena in A Midsummer Night's Dream, for example, in such competition with one another over male characters and expressing lots of petty rivalries and jealousies toward one another, it makes Shakespeare almost look conservative by comparison. So I guess I've just undone what I've just said about Shakespeare's accomplishments in the comic genre rather than the tragic genre. It all depends, I guess, on the context, whether we're looking at him alone or in the context of other male dramatists or the context of other female dramatists. It gets immensely complicated the more we change the context, like pieces in a kaleidoscope, right? Thank you, Roberta.
Thank you very much.
What I feel like Shakespeare novel is like more like moving art. So it means like it's very flexible. So it's like each like how's it? Sorry about that. It's like each like feminism or like genders, right? But I feel like it's more likely westernized play. So it's hard. I think it's harder to reflect the like Asian like cultures or like their social lives. So I don't think it can be like a moving moving art to me. So what do you think that like? I mean.
So you think that Shakespeare, if I'm understanding you correctly, might not be as flexible as I'm arguing that
Yes.
he is if we place him in a different context, not by himself or other English playwrights or other female English playwrights, but if we look at him in the context of Asian literature, we get different meanings in Shakespeare's text? Is that what you're getting?
Yeah, yes. I mean, like it's like Shakespeare. Shakespeare is like is very complicated English, and then it's written in like before 400 years. So even like Western people, it's harder to understand what he means about it. So it's like if it's very moving culture, and then the meaning will be like damaged by time to buy time. Sorry about that. Time to buy time. So feel like it's like I'm so worried that I mean like I want to know. It's like I think it's possibly can be Shakespeare. The itself can be damaged by like the misunderstanding, like meaning of the context. So I mean like I want. What do you think about them?
I would agree that changing the context, as I said before, does change our sense of Shakespeare's accomplishments. Yeah, no, Gary is a PhD student in English who lived in Japan for a few years, and his proposed dissertation is. I'll let you talk about your own proposed dissertation, okay. But maybe he can answer your question more specifically. He's dealing with. Contemporary Japanese adaptations of specifically Romeo and Juliet. And I don't know if you can answer her question more specifically.
Okay, yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah, I think that is a big concern. I've done a lot of work with a lot of scholars in Asia looking at Asian adaptation of Shakespeare, and that is it's a very big concern that they have, that when you take Shakespeare out of Elizabethan England, and particularly when you start taking Shakespeare out of English, are you still keeping Shakespeare, or are we now just using Shakespeare as a brand name as opposed to this being a genuine Shakespearean work?
Is that what you were getting at? Okay, I understand.
Yeah, so that's a big part of the work I'm doing, is trying to navigate at what point do we lose the real Shakespeare and we start moving into kind of that bardolatry that we're just still using his name to sell a generic plot that we can say, yeah, it's two lovers who are in a situation that their families don't like each other, but, is that still Romeo and Juliet, or are we now moving into Ovid? Where have we lost that? Yeah, it's a hard question to answer, and I think we're all still working on it.
It's a very hot topic in Shakespeare studies, by the way. This notion of appropriation and adaptation, especially when we cross cultures and when we cross language, we move Shakespeare from one language to another. And now I think I'm more fully understanding what you were getting at. We have a journal now called Borrowers and Lenders, published here in the United States. The subtitle is The Journal of Shakespeare and Appropriation. So it's a whole journal devoted to raising these kinds of questions. How much do you change Shakespeare and still call it Shakespeare? If you take out the language, the beautiful blank verse and the rhyme couplets and so on from early modern England, but you keep the plot, is that still Shakespeare? And we could look at contemporary examples from popular culture, from contemporary films, right? 10 Things I Hate About You. Oh, what's the 12th Night one? She's the Man. Yeah, you know, we got the plot line, but we certainly don't have Shakespeare's language anymore. So that might be an analogy to what you're getting at. You know, at what point do we? So it is. It's all kind of up in the air. I don't have a fixed response. It's all kind of being examined, and I think there's a lot of disagreement in the field or divided opinion. So that's why I'm fudging maybe or vamping. Yeah. Right.
So that's why we only, when we read the Shakespeare plays, it's like only one version. That's why I was worried that like maybe there's like we couldn't understand what he's mentioned on the play, but it's like Shakespeare plays like a moving culture, and then like it can be different by like each writers or the producer. But it's like, to me, it's like still it's very complicated.
It is.
It's hard to understand.
It's very complicated. But I would just point out that in addition to the points that I was making, that theater productions and interpretations are constantly evolving, and academic criticism and theoretical approaches and the kinds of meanings that we're bringing out today that were buried for 400 years, that just as that is very fluid, so too is the text. And Eric Rasmussen from University of Nevada, Reno might be speaking, because he's a textual scholar, he might be speaking more specifically about that, that phenomenon. But in new textual studies of the last couple decades, again, we have the same thing going on in terms of a disbelief in the text as frozen, static, fixed, right? It too is understood as multiple in nature, a good quarto, a bad quarto, a certain plays, plus the folio, all in disagreement with one another. Editors are faced with the challenge of which to go to. Do I invent my own version based upon my putting together all three of those? Or do I stick with the one quarto or the other quarto or the folio? So there's slippage, there's slipperiness and elisions and flexibility and open-endedness in the notion of the text itself. And I think as well as theatrical interpretations, as well as critical interpretations, so it's all just a bunch of sliding downhill, right? So again, the premise of your question, I think, is based upon this notion of fixedness as opposed to dynamic text. And that's why it's so complicated, because we have dynamism occurring in all these areas. Theater, criticism, and the text.
To my language, when I read the Shakespeare, it's like that can be when you first Shakespeare, the play, or thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gajowski.